With us now is Governor Mary Fallin, Republican from Oklahoma. Governor Fallin has enjoyed a very successful career in public service, having served in the Oklahoma House of Representatives as Lieutenant Governor of Oklahoma and as a member of the U.S. House of Representatives. In 2011, she became the Sooner State's first female governor. She is also the vice chair of the National Governors Association. And Governor Fallin, thanks so much for being with us today.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Well, I understand that the National Governors Association Executive Committee met with President Obama and Treasury Secretary Tim Geithner at the White House yesterday. Did you leave that meeting more optimistic or more pessimistic about how these fiscal cliff negotiations will play out?
Well, I appreciated the President and the Vice President and Secretary Geithner for meeting with the National Governors Association Executive Board yesterday. Our message to them was that we think it's very important that governors have a seat at the table, because states can be laboratories of democracy for government reform and finding ways to create more efficiency and saving money. And we have good ideas on how to use limited resources and be able to serve our constituents in our states. And, of course, we were expressing our deep concern about the fiscal cliff itself and how important it is that Congress, the U.S. House, the Senate, and certainly the President all work together to find a solution to be able to keep us from going off the fiscal cliff, but yet also not damage our national economy and certainly our state's economy. One of the things that we know is that there are still 30 states in the nation that have not come up to the levels of their economy from the 2008 recession. There are still states that have high unemployment rates. Some states have done better with their budgets. Some still have huge budget shortfalls. And so it was a word of caution to say, the decisions that you're making here in Washington can deeply affect our states, our economic recovery, our job creation, affect our state budgets. And we think the governors, need to be able to give our input to them. And as to whether we're optimistic or not, we appreciate the President giving us time. He certainly listened. He said he heard our concerns, and we met with Speaker Boehner and Leader Reid, who were a little bit less optimistic, I will just be honest with you say, because there's still some pretty tough negotiation on some philosophical differences between Republicans and Democrats in the House and the Senate.
Now, Republicans have questioned the president's sincerity about averting the fiscal cliff. A number of Republicans have said that he would actually like to go over it. Did President Obama say anything in that meeting that left you believing that he is indeed sincere about working with Republicans and averting the cliff?
Well, the president, did say that he has talked to not only governors, other elected officials, members of the House and Senate, but he's talked to the business community itself and understands the concerns, the seriousness of the fiscal cliff itself. And he did say that he didn't want to go over the fiscal cliff and understood the crisis that it would create in our nation. But he also made it very clear that he had some principles and philosophical disagreements with Republicans on certain issues that he was going to stand very firm on. And, one of the things I suggested to him on behalf of the governors, we had a couple of points that we wanted to get across to him, was that we understand as states that there will be cuts, federal cuts in spending. There's certainly going to be less money coming to the states, but as less money comes to the states, that we would like to have some flexibility with our programming, with strings that are attached with federal monies. And one of the things he said yesterday, and the Vice President actually said this on a phone call today, is, we are open to giving our governors and our states flexibility on programs as long as it meets their stated goals. Mm-hmm. Well, as long as it meets their stated goals means that as long as you're for what we're for, then we'll give you flexibility. But if you have different goals than what we have, then to me that means that there's not going to be flexibility. So that was a concern to me, was that we as governors know our state budgets, we know our economic conditions, we know our politics within our legislatures, what can be done, what can't be done. We certainly know the important needs in our populations, and it's hard to make budgetary decisions if our hands are tied when federal monies come down, but with strings attached.
Mm-hmm. Now, let's say Congress and the White House do not reach a deal over spending cuts and tax increases. What impact is this going to have on state budgets like Oklahoma's?
Well, actually, I have met with our budget director in the state and my policy team, and we estimate that if the fiscal cliff does happen, sequestration does occur, it is currently written into law, that our estimates are we could lose at least $137 million in federal funding for the FY13 budget, and that could include cuts to education funding to the tune of around $50 million for Oklahoma, approximately $40 million in cuts to health and human services, and then that's just two of our main categories of spending in our state, health and welfare and education itself. But then if you look at the direct and the indirect impact upon employment and jobs in our economy, it could have a huge impact. In fact, the White House itself has said that if the Bush tax cuts should expire, Oklahomans will have $2.2 billion less to spend in Oklahoma's economy, which could lead to a great decrease in our gross domestic product. Even in the jobs and the impact that's been projected if, say, there's a cut in defense spending in our nation, it's been estimated we could lose around 8,000 defense-related jobs with sequestration. So these are serious issues for our states, and I told the Vice President just a little while ago that we're getting ready to work on our budget. We've already began the initial plans that we'll present to the legislature this January, but it is very hard to make spending decisions when there is so much up in the air in Washington, and certainly the uncertainty is not good for not only our state economy but our national economy, and we need some certainty in being able to plan for our budget and our legislative session, which will begin in January and February, just a month and 2 months away.
So this situation governors would like to see resolved by the end of the year. There's been talk there's been talk about perhaps putting together a stopgap kind of measure that kind of delays the fiscal cliff. You all seem to feel that this needs to be addressed right away.
Well, I think the uncertainty in the marketplace has had an effect upon our economy, and if you think about it, Christmas time is one of the biggest revenue generators for local economies and state economies, and frankly the national economy too. And if people feel there is uncertainty, whether it is the tax cuts, sequestration, federal funding, jobs, the economy, I think there will be an automatic slowdown of people purchasing things during the Christmas holiday season, which is one of the biggest holidays of the year. And so that in itself can cause an economic slowdown in our nation just within the next week or two as people prepare for the holidays.
Governor, Speaker Boehner has put forth a fiscal cliff proposal that agrees to $800 billion in new revenue from closing loopholes and eliminating deductions, but would not raise tax rates on the top 2%, saving $2.2 trillion over 10 years. The plan has come under fire from a number of conservatives. Do you support this plan?
Well, we've yet to see the details on his plan, but I will tell you in the state of Oklahoma that when I was balancing our budget shortfall last year, one of the things that we talked about was closing some of our loopholes and gaps of things that didn't create economic growth in our own Oklahoma economy. We have some tax incentives in the state of Oklahoma that we want to make sure actually generate revenue, generate jobs, help grow our economy. And so we have also looked at things like that. So I appreciate where he's coming from. We certainly don't know the details on the loopholes that they're talking about, but I think there has to be certainly reductions in spending. There needs to be entitlement reform. We've yet to see the president come out with an entitlement reform package on one of our biggest cost factors in our state budgets, and that is Medicaid itself. The health care costs have been going up, but yet we're seeing proposals for more government programming, like with Obamacare, and more proposed tax increases, such as with the Bush tax cuts that may expire, that the president's talked about letting some of those expire. But yet we're not seeing reform from our big cost to our states, which is entitlements.
Now, President Obama is adamant about raising taxes on the top 2%, or those making $250,000 a year or more. What is your advice for your fellow Republicans in Washington? Should they remain equally defiant about not raising those taxes, even if it means possibly going over the cliff? Or would you support a tax hike assuming it's revenue neutral?
Well, of course, in general, I don't think we should be raising taxes, especially when we're coming out of an economic recession from 2008. I was a member of Congress during that time period when we went through the recession. It's been a slow economic recovery. I know in the state of Oklahoma, we've experienced our economic downturns. We're now out of that. We have gone from when I came into office 2 years ago having $2.02 in our rainy day savings account to now having over $577 million in our savings account because of prudent fiscal policies that we have put into place in our state and pro-jobs, pro-growth initiatives through legislation. But if Congress doesn't come to some type of agreement on reducing the deficit, which I think is a threat to our national security and certainly our economic security, and doesn't work on reducing spending in Washington, entitlement reform, we're going to continue to put the whole United States and certainly our states that have began a recovery process at great risk. And so these are very tough issues. But, my recommendation is that they continue to talk, continue to look at ways that we can reform government. There are a lot of great examples that the governors are trying to share with the president, with Congress themselves. We as governors have had to close just within the Republican governors themselves, over $60 billion of budget gaps over the last couple of years. We've had to balance our budgets. We're mandated by law to do that. We can't print money. And I think there's some great lessons to be learned from the governors themselves. And it's time to, tighten our belts and make sure that all hands are on deck to keep the collaboration, the discussion going.
Governor, last question for you real quickly is on a separate issue. You, along with other Republican governors, have said that you won't be expanding Medicaid and refuse to implement insurance exchanges as part of Obamacare. Will you pursue other avenues to stop other aspects of Obamacare in Oklahoma? And if so, what measures would you plan to take?
Well, we currently have a legal challenge to Obamacare that is still standing in the courts right now, which is a challenge on the tax issue, and it will be decided at some point in time. There was a little bit of news on it in the paper this morning that the court was deciding whether to take the issue up, and they have begun those initial discussions on that. So there still is a legal challenge out there by the state of Oklahoma. Once again, as we talk about the fiscal cliff and the impact that it's going to have upon our states, and I'd mentioned that we estimate we could see a loss of $40 million for health and human services just in Oklahoma alone. How can I be even looking at the possibility of expanding Medicaid when we don't know what's going to happen with the fiscal cliff, when we know we're $16 trillion in debt as a nation, and more mandates being passed down to the states? And one of the other messages that we gave the president yesterday was, don't pass the cost down to the states, because as you cut the federal funding, the states can't assume those cost shifts, down to the states themselves. And so we chose not to expand Medicaid in our state. We're certainly very compassionate to people who are uninsured, who don't have access to health care and can't afford it. We tried to do things like lawsuit reform in Oklahoma to lower health care costs. We applied for a waiver years ago to establish a separate program called Insure Oklahoma, which is a three-way partnership to where the employee of a small business who can't afford to provide health insurance pays a small premium. A lot of times it's around $30 a month. The employer pays a share of that, and then we match it with a federal match, so it's a three-way split. It's one of the ways that Oklahoma's helped try to address the high cost of health insurance to help small businesses and those who can't afford health insurance have access to care. So there are some good demonstration models out there among the states, and once again, that's what we asked the president and the speaker and Leader Reid to consider, is look to the states for some of the solutions to some of the problems facing our nation, and especially as it comes to cost savings and efficiencies.
All right, Governor Mary Fallin, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be with you.
And thank you for watching Newsmax TV.